Sociologists tell us that they have never found a culture that doesn't worship. I'm going to unpack that a little bit for you today, because it is an animation in me that everybody I relate to. I am aware, intellectually, and now I've experienced it practically over years, that everybody is aware there's something more powerful than them in the universe. Something above them. I could give you dozens of situations like that. One would be my own doctor, Scott Keller. I've met in a little group with Scott for 35 years. Scott told me about a patient he had that was an evangelistic atheist. Every time he came in, he tried to engage him to try to prove there's no God. One day, that guy's little girl, 10 years old, hit by a car, on a bicycle, hit by a car. They're in the emergency room, and Scott's working on her. And all of a sudden, he hears the father, "Oh, God, don't let my little girl die." Where does that come from? That's what I want to unpack today. So I keep that in mind. I don't believe atheists when they talk about it. So here's what happened recently. It kind of made me think about doing this today. Recently, I was looking for a pair of walking shoes, comfortable walking shoes. So I go into Sports Authority, and I'm looking around, poking around, and this he was about 6'5", this young African-American guy came up, and was real pleasant. So what are you looking for? And I said, I'm looking for some really comfortable walking shoes. He said, casual or serious exercise? And I said, oh man, serious exercise, long past. I just want some comfortable walking shoes. I'm going to spend 3 weeks and 17 days in Asia and Singapore and Seoul and Tokyo. And I just want some comfortable walking shoes. So he says, you going on business or pleasure? I said, well, to me it's all the same. I said, I'm a follower of Jesus. And I said, so wherever I go, I'm encouraging people to follow Jesus. And he was put off by that. Well, really? Don't all cultures have their own religion? I mean, like, why do you have to take Jesus to Singapore? Don't they already have? I said, yeah, they sure do. I said, that's my experience. I've been in almost 70 countries, 69 countries, and that's my experience, that everybody has some kind of a worship center. Could I tell you a few stories about that to kind of authenticate what you're talking about? He said, sure. So I want to tell you some of the stories I told him. By the way, this conversation in Sports Authority went on for over an hour. Wow. There were 2 other customers in the same aisle. One of them looked at boxes of shoes for a whole hour. I'm serious. I kept looking over to him, and I wanted to say, hey, come on, join in. The second guy actually just stopped looking at the shoes and just stood and talked, or just stood and listened, right? So anyway, this is what I told the guy. I was trying to talk to him about the fact that, what I've just said, that God is at work in the world in ways that they don't even know, okay? So let me start off with some stories. Since I go to Korea a lot, now I'm going to go on and jump ahead and maybe skip some stuff. I told him about the Incas. You guys have probably been to Machu Picchu and the Incas, and they worship the sun god, right? Inti. Well, the king at that time, the guy that built Machu Picchu, was Pakakudi. So they worshiped the Inti, the sun god, and as you know, it was very bloody, right? Sacrifice humans and all that kind of stuff. But one day, Pakakudi addressed the Council of Coricancha, which is still there, obviously, but addressed them, and he said, you know, to all the priests and all the high-ranking people, I don't think Inti is the true God. I don't think he's all-powerful, the sun, because a small cloud or my hand can block out his light. He couldn't be all-powerful if my hand can block him out. So he asked the priest, would you do research and see if we have ever worshipped any other god besides Inti? So they did, I don't know, 3 months or 2 years, I don't know. They came back and they said, yes, many generations ago, we worshipped a god called Viracocha. Viracocha existed in 3 persons. So they became convinced that Viracocha was the true god, not the sun. They would not let the people change. They continued to worship Inti, but all the leaders and Pakakudi started worshiping a god, an unknown god that existed in three persons, and the name was Viracocha. I'm going to wrap all this up later. There's a group of people called the Karen people. Maybe you've heard of them. They live on the border of Burma and Thailand. They don't have their own country. There's about 7 million of them. Some of them are in Burma, some of them are in Thailand, and neither country really stops them. In fact, they've had a couple of attempts at becoming their own country, revolution against these two countries. But basically, they just live on the border and on a spillover on both sides. The Karen people, I've had the privilege, a wonderful privilege, of meeting one Karen person. His name was Prita Pathanathabur. He was a Karen person who came down to Chiang Mai from the Karen people and grew up there at 12 and grew up there and became the mayor of Chiang Mai, eventually became in the cabinet down in Bangkok. And so I told him this story, and he said, oh, I know this story well. So here's the story. In 1795, an Englishman was coming through the area where the Karen people live. And they asked him, have you got the book? And he said, what do you mean? They said, well, we are so embarrassed. Our forefathers lost the book. The book is by Waiwa, Y-W-A. Is that close to Yahweh? The book is by Waiwa, and we lost it, and we're so embarrassed. Have you got the book? Because our tradition is that a white brother will bring us the book and explain to us what's in it. He said, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have a book, and he left. 20 years later, in 1815, another Englishman was going through that area, and they asked him, do you have the book? Same thing, tell him the same thing. He said, I don't know what you're talking about, but I got a book. So they were so fascinated by his book that he left the book with them. So they set up a little priesthood around the book. They began to worship the book. They don't know what was in it, but this must be the book. A white brother brought the book. Some time goes by, and a very, very famous missionary, Baptist missionary named Adoniram Judson. Anybody know that name? Wonderful to read about him if you haven't. Adoniram Judson moved to Rangoon, Burma, 800 miles south of the Karen people, and began his ministry. He was an awesome missionary. He's there a few years, and one day a guy knocked on his door and said he needed work. It turned out this man was a fugitive from the Karen people. He had been involved in manslaughter of some sort, maybe a fight, and the guy died. Anyway, he was running for his life, and he's down in Bangkok, 800 miles away from his home. Adoniram took him in, and he chopped wood or washed windows or whatever he did. They became friends, and over a period of time, he led that guy from the Karen people to Christ and explained to him what was in the book. He didn't know about that book back there, but he said, this book is about God, written by Yahweh, and so he explained it to him. The guy came to Christ, eventually went back to Karen, and hundreds of thousands of people came to Christ because of that one man. Today, there's about 7 million, 25% of them are still Christians. Now, I want to go back to that first part. Why in the world would they even have a legend about a white brother with a book by Waiwa, Y-W-A? Going to unpack that in a minute. I'll go on and tell you. By the way, no, I'll go back and tell you the Korean thing. That's so precious to me. The Korean Peninsula for years was known as the Hermit Kingdom because it was just, they kept everybody out. It's almost like North Korea does today. They just kept everybody out, and it was just a animist, religion. But about 150 years ago, the Presbyterians sent missionaries to Korea. It happened that they landed in North Korea. Korea is very similar to California. All the mountains and the resources and the water and the gold and any kind of resources in the north. South is like our Southern California. So anyway, they actually didn't land. They pulled a boat in close to shore, and all of those Presbyterian missionaries were killed, either by spears or rocks or something before they got off the boat. A few years later, the Presbyterians sent more missionaries. I don't know if they landed at a different place, but they landed, and a very condensed version of this is they began dialogue with the people, and I'm only giving you the kernel. They said, do you have any gods? Do you have a God? Oh, we got a lot of gods. We got the God of the harvest, and the God of the river, and the God of the moon, and the fertility God, and all that kind of stuff. The missionaries were so wise, they didn't say, oh, those are all pagan gods. Those, they just, oh, really, that's fascinating. Tell me, any more? Oh, yeah, they think of another God. They pressed them till they continued to tell all their gods, and they got done. They said, any more? You got any more? No, we don't. Oh, yeah, there's one other God, but we don't know anything about him. We just know he's more powerful than all of these gods. They listened enough, dialogued enough, where they said, it's very interesting that by the way, that God's name was Hanul-Nim, N-U-L, Hanul-Nim. They eventually said, Hanul-Nim knew that you wanted to know about him, his character and his plans, so he sent his son Jesus into the world to explain to you who he is. So today, when you meet with, big churches over there, when they pray, when they use the word for God, it's Hananim. That carried on. Huh? Yeah, that's right. Where did that come from? Hananim. China had the same thing. Hello, Bill. China had the same thing, and it was called an unknown god. It was called Shangdi. Shangdi was the all-powerful god that, by the way, 2,600 years before Christ, the king would sacrifice an animal, a bull, once a year at the heavenly temple, once a year, to this all-powerful god named Shangdi. The missionaries came, and they basically said, Shangdi is kind of a pagan god. We've come to tell you about God, G-O-D. And it didn't take, like the Presbyterians in Korea. By the way, as you know, that went on to the biggest churches in the world in Korea now. The biggest church in the world is Choyang-Gi's church. That's Assembly of God. The biggest Baptist church in the world is there. The biggest Methodist church in the world is there, and so on. But that's Korea. Everything's big there. Companies are big, churches are big, and so on. I've had people actually, I've spoken to 65,000 in one church, I've had people actually embarrassed when I ask them where they go to church. Oh, we only have 12,000 people, They're embarrassed because it's so small. It's just, Korea's got big stuff. I'm going to wait, I'll tell you something else, but I'll wait for that. Let me tell you one more story and then I'll draw some conclusions. This story is recorded by Socrates and Diogenes. 600 years before Jesus, there was a plague in Athens, a major plague, black plague, bubonic, one of those major, a lot of people dying. So I don't know if you know the history of the Athenians, but they were very religious. They had lots of gods. And when they would conquer another country, they would bring the gods from that one home. So they had their gods and everybody else's gods around them. So they had lots of gods. They sacrificed to every one of those gods, and the plague continued. They didn't know what to do. So one day they're having a council meeting, and somebody suggested, none of us have an idea what to do. We all know that the wisest man that anybody has ever heard of is Epimenides. He lives on the island of Crete. Let's send for Epimenides. Maybe he will know what to do. So they do. I don't know how long that trip takes, but people are dying. So Epimenides shows up, gets off the boat. They tell him the problem. People are dying. We've sacrificed. We don't know what to do. What should we do? He said, I'm really tired. He said, meet me at sunrise tomorrow morning, sunrise, with stones, stonemasons, and sheep. I'm going to bed. And they protested. People will die overnight. Tell us what to do. I'm tired. Meet me at sunrise, stones, stonemasons, and sheep. So obviously they were there at sunrise on the Acropolis. Stones, stonemasons, and sheep. So that morning he said to them, I really don't know what to do. But he said, I've learned that if you make good assumptions, you can probably figure things out. So he said, I'm going to make 3 assumptions, the wise man. I'm going to make 3 assumptions. First one is, there is a God you haven't sacrificed to yet. Number 2, the assumption is that that God is powerful enough to stop the plague if he wants to. And the third assumption is that if we tell him how sorry we are that we don't know his name, and we beg for mercy, maybe he will show us mercy and stop the plague. Now, release the sheep on the hillside, and wherever one lays down, take the stonemasons and stones there and build an altar. As you know, the altar looked more like a coffee table than some church altar. Little low thing. So they said, they protested again, by the way. They said, well, they've been penned up all night. They're going to eat till afternoon. They won't lay down till after. People are going to die. He said, release the sheep. Within minutes, the sheep would lay down all over the hill. So they take stonemasons and stones and they build the altar. And they come back to Epimenides and they said, okay, what should we do? He said, well, obviously we're going to sacrifice the sheep that lay down on the altar that you built on that spot. So they said, well, yeah, but we always have a name on our altars. What name should we put on it? And Epimenides said, write on every one of those altars, Agnosto Theo, to the unknown God. Now, you know your Bible, you're way ahead of me. In Acts, Paul, 600 years later, comes in and addresses the council and says, I'm really encouraged to see that you're so religious. As a matter of fact, I was out walking around today, I actually saw an altar to an unknown God. And he said, now I want to explain to you the unknown God, and he preached Jesus. Where did that come from? An unknown God. In China, in Korea, with the Karen people. And there's 1,000 more of these stories. And many of them are mine. In other words, I've been involved with them. That's why I go into a situation with that guy at Sports Authority. I have in my mind, everybody I meet, they have an awareness there's a God. I meet an atheist and they say they're an atheist. I don't debate them, but I know they don't. It's not true. They are not atheists. And I know that for a fact because of the Bible. And I've got some experiences that prove it to me. Let me read you a couple of scriptures. By the way, another one would be the wise men who had no direct knowledge but followed a star, right? Now that's weird, really.
Is there any indication has there ever been any study around where they probably came from?
Well, they came from Babylon, probably, but the east. And there wasn't 3 of them. There's 3 gifts mentioned. There might have been 20 or 30 of them.
Yeah.
But we talk about the 3 wise men because there was gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Like each one was carrying one, but it's more than likely was a caravan of many wise men. Anyway, they had no direct knowledge, but they got there. Where does that come from? Where does in a person's heart who has nothing about God? Well, here's what happens, in my opinion. I'll jump ahead and give you a scripture. In Romans 1, it talks about that every person in the world, this is what I believe and this is the way I operate, every person in the whole world knows there's a God. And in the Phillips translation, it says, it's a paraphrase, but it says, I know it's there because I put it there, God speaking. Every person in the world knows there's a God, if for no other reason by creation. Well, you can play with that or whatever, but I used to lead young life clubs for 11 years, and so I always made up stories, right, for the kids. So here's a story I made up about that one. Let's in your mind go back to 4,000 years before Jesus. In Australia, Aborigines. There is no TV, there is no books, etc. They just sit around the fire every night and try to get some food during the day. 2 little 10-year-old boys sitting around a fire every night talking. No Wii's, no TVs, no cell phones. Just talk and look at the stars and watch the fire. One night, one of these little 10-year-old boys says, hey, Tom, did your dad make the stars? I asked my dad last night, and he said he didn't make them. So ask your dad. Next night, they're back. Tom said, my dad said he didn't make them either. Okay, you ask your grandpa, and I'll ask my grandpa. So they go back and ask grandpas. So you can just play that, exhaust that, where they've checked all the people they can, and then even those oldest people say, no, none of our forefathers created the stars. At some point, those two guys show back up at that fire and say, wow, there's something bigger than us. That's what Romans 1 is talking about. If for no other reason by creation. You do not look at the stars and say, yeah, I know the guy that made those. No, there's an unknown God somehow.